Good morning. My name is John Thompson. I'm one of the Parkview School Board members, and I'm here today with Tracy Case. She is the business manager for our school district, and we're going to talk about some financial things, tax impacts, things that you might want to know dollars wise, and like how funding and things like that interact with our budget, and why we would need to ask for a referendum in the first place. So, Tracy, my first question is this. Can you explain the tax impact of the failed referendum last April, how that had on property owners? And if the April 2nd referendum passes, what kind of impact is that going to have on them?
So the short answer to the April 2023 failed referendum is that taxpayers saw a significant drop in the Parkview portion of their property tax bill. Like many other districts in the state, Parkview's found it harder and harder to operate without asking taxpayers for additional dollars through a referendum. Going back a few years, April 2020, taxpayers approved an operational referendum for 3 years, and the tax bill in 2022 was the last bill that they got that reflected that operational referendum. Which means moving into the 23-24 school year, we started thinking about, okay, do we need to go to operational referendum? We assessed our needs and determined we did. So we had a question on the November 22 ballot and on the April 23 ballot, and both of those failed by very small margins. So we had some difficult decisions to make, and we cut over $1 million as we go into this 23-24 school year. The result of that can be seen by the taxpayer on their 2023 tax bill that they got this past December. And in fact, those tax bills on the Parkview portion went down approximately 40%. So there was a significant decrease because of that failed operational referendum and the cuts that we had to make.
Okay, so talking about that, and I know some of this is getting into the weeds for some people, but so 2022 tax bill, we had a mill rate for that. 2023, it obviously dropped. So this would affect the 2024 mill rate, is that correct? And what's that going to look like? How's that going to compare with those previous 2 years?
Sure. So April 2024, so just a few months from now, we will have a question on the ballot. We're asking for $2,294,125 for operational costs. And that will cause the mill rate to increase. And so obviously the mill rate will increase. We're asking for additional dollars. The tax bill portion for Parkview will increase on the tax bill that taxpayers get in December of 2024. So we went from a mill rate of $8.98 in the 22-23 school year. This year we're at $5.32. And if the operational referendum were to pass, it would be $8.91. So just under the mill rate prior to the failed referendum. Now, over the past 10 years, we've actually dropped the mill rate over 60%. For instance, 2015-16 was $13.49. It's just dropped since then.
Yeah, cool. So why do we have to go to a referendum? I mean, I've heard people ask questions, why can't Parkview just come up with money from somewhere else? Because if someone's in a household and they need to come up with extra money, they have ways to do that. Why a referendum? Why is that the way Parkview's going about this?
Yeah, so districts in Wisconsin receive funding primarily in two ways. We receive money from the state and from the local taxpayer. The state actually controls the amount we get from those two buckets of money. And if districts need additional funds outside those two buckets, the state has allowed for boards to approve going and asking the taxpayer to increase those dollars through a referendum. In 2023, 83 school districts asked their taxpayers for additional funds through a referendum. So really, the state is not keeping up with inflationary costs. And so I'm going to show a chart to try to make that visual, if you will. But districts are receiving a per pupil amount. And if you see the black line, 2020 was just under $10,000 for Parkview School District that we were allowed to receive in revenue from those two buckets, from the state and from taxpayers.
And that was $10,000 for quite a few years, wasn't it?
Yeah, yes. In fact, there was a few years there was no additional increase there. However, you can see the red line, inflationary costs continue to rise. And so this year we actually did see an increase in the revenue limit per pupil. We're at 11,000, so that's awesome. That's a great increase from the state. However, because it's not keeping up with inflationary costs, there's actually a difference of $3,840 per pupil between the inflationary cost and what we're actually getting from the state. Now, just if you do simple math and take that $3,848 per pupil and times it by the number of kids in our seats, that number is $3.2 million. That if the state were keeping up with those inflationary costs, that, I guess the question would be, would we continue to be going to operational referendum? So I think that's just the big answer. I don't think the state is keeping up with the rate of inflation. Thankfully, they've given the vehicle for us to go to the taxpayers if the board approves that, which they have. And so that leaves it up to the local taxpayer.
Okay. So something else that I think is affected by all this is staff turnover. And you shared some statistics that were kind of shocking to me. I know I'm a new school board member. I started last April and been in all the meetings approving, resignations, new hires. And I was really pretty surprised by how many new hires we had just this past year because of resignations and people retiring or going somewhere else. So what does that look like? Like, what's the composition of our current staff?
Yeah, well, first off, our staff are made up of teachers, paraprofessionals, those are the aides that are working with our students in the classrooms, bus driver, custodian, maintenance, food service, administration, and then our admin assistants, like our secretaries, bookkeeper, health aides. We've got around 120 staff members and 70 teachers, and that includes student services, so our counselor, psychologist, and so 70 certified staff members. And of those 70 certified staff members, 50% of them have been at Parkview for 6 years or under.
Wow.
50%.
Wow.
So what that speaks to is the turnover that we have at Parkview. Now, there's a number of reasons for turnover, but when you have turnover like that, you also need to really watch what we are paying our teachers and our staff, even our hourly staff, what we're paying them to try to not just get new people to come in, but to keep the ones that we have so that we don't have that turnover. And
I'm sure that affects the consistency and the quality of the education we provide too, and how we care for students.
For sure.
Which is important. So one last question. Last year when the referendum failed, the district had to cut $1.1 million from the current budget. What do you anticipate will be the impact if this April 2nd referendum fails?
If the referendum fails, we have some hard decisions to make. We are actually in the process of coming up with a list of what those cuts would be if the operational referendum fails. And we will actually share that list as we go forward so that we know, not only will we know what we will be paying for if the operational referendum passes, but we would also know exactly the things that we would cut.
But we just can't maintain what we're doing. We're going to have some costs that are going to go up.
Correct.
That are fixed costs out of our control.
Yeah, our heating continues to rise. Our busing costs, we're in a contract. We know what those costs are year over year. It's very difficult to control not only property and liability insurance costs, but health insurance costs. And we need to be able to provide that to our staff. So those are things that we don't have any control over.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks for your time today, Tracy. Appreciate all the answers. Hope this is helpful to you. If you have questions about this, please contact Dr. Anderson. He can get answers for you, or he can talk to Tracy and come up with some good additional information for you. So thank you for watching.